Hey, what's up? John Sonmez from SimpleProgrammer.com. Today I'm going to be talking about planning a software project. I've gotten some emails on this in the past, and I decided to finally do a video on this topic. This is something that a lot of developers need to know how to do. Like, how do you get started? How do you plan out? Do you go all the way in depth and plan it all out from the beginning, or do you fly by the seat of your pants? Do you be super agile? What do you do? So this email is from Christopher, and Christopher says, I've heard from other developers about sitting down and planning out an application before you write a single line of code. To be honest, this is something I've never done before. Like so many other developers, I will just create a new project and start working it out as I go. I recently watched Bob Martin lecture on YouTube where he was talking to the audience and drawing out every little detail of an imaginary application, including classes and methods right down to the variable types. I've never really seen this discussed anywhere, and I was just wondering what you think about it and if there is a resource you'd suggest reading. So Christopher, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of developers that don't know how to get started. Like, how do you start building an app? And there's a lot of ideas behind this, right? I remember back in the day having rational rows, and having these UML diagrams and planning out these apps and all to the class and variable level. And the whole idea was that you could plan this whole thing out in UML, and then you could click a button and generate all the code, and then you'd have your application. And that really didn't work out so well. It was a cool idea, but it didn't work out. And the reason why is because one of the most difficult things in software development is that you don't really know what you need until you start building it. And that's why a lot of the software development best practices have moved from that kind of waterfall methodology where you kind of do big upfront planning and design into agile, where you're sort of, I don't want to say flying by the seat of your pants, but you're iterating, you're building something, you're seeing, getting feedback, getting input, and then you're iterating, you're changing it, and it's growing with you. Now, there's problems with both approaches, and I am not an extremist on either side. See, here's the thing. If you're building a simple application, you should probably have an idea of what you're going to build. Like, you don't just start writing code without having an idea, and you need to plan out what you're building before you build it. I have this saying, I say, every time you sit down at your desk to do work, you turn on your computer, know exactly what you plan to do, right? And you should do that every time you write code. You should know, what kind of code am I writing? What am I creating? Am I creating a user interface, and what should it look like, right? So you got to have that level. But for a small project, you could probably get away with not planning things out so much, right? Being a lot more agile with, build this version of the app, send it to the users, get some feedback, and then iterate on that, iterate on that, iterate on that. Don't plan much out ahead of time. Don't even know what database you're going to use. You don't even know if you're going to need a database. There's a lot of books on test-driven development that go through this process, and you can see that. One good example, just doing test-driven development is Uncle Bob Martin. It's kind of funny. I'll be showing the counterpoint of what he was saying, but he has a book called Clean Code. And in that book, I believe he's got a bowling kata example, and you see how he's iterating through that. There's also, I've seen other examples from him and other developers where they basically, build an app and they don't even know if they're going to use a database or not until they need that requirement. So that's really at the core of Agile. I think probably, another Bob Martin book, Agile Principles, Practices, and Patterns in C#. I believe that's the name of it. I'm just off the top of my head here. Another good book. Bob Martin is just, first of all, he's an awesome guy, right? He wrote the foreword for my book, Soft Skills, the Software Developer's Life Manual, and I really appreciate it. He just wrote a super awesome foreword. I've had the opportunity to chat with him. He's in my How to Market Yourself as a Software Developer course, if you're interested in that. But anyway, he's a great guy, and I agree with him on a ton of stuff. So I think, again, it's contextual driven. So I don't think that necessarily, I think if you talk to someone and say, should you absolutely design everything up front, or should you use a more agile approach? There's not a clear answer to that. So again, getting back to the topic, if it's a small project, it's probably going to work like that, right? But if it's a huge project, right? If you're designing, for example, I've worked at companies where we've designed printers, right? Multi-function printers. You are not developing that agilely, right? I mean, you sort of are, right? You can do some of it, but you need to think ahead of time. You've got, you've got hardware, you've got timing constraints, real constraints in the timing because it's a real-time embedded operating system, right? You've got firmware essentially that's running that timing has to be done. You've got multiple teams coordinating. You can't just start building the printer, right? And then building on top of that. You got to plan a lot of stuff up front. So it depends on what you're doing and where the balance is, right? The other thing is, if it's just a complex system, sometimes that architecture needs to be planned up front as well. I wrote an article about this called Mob Architecture When Scrum Hurts, and you can check that out. And my views have changed a little bit since then, but that kind of highlights the problem, which is basically that sometimes when you have these Scrum teams, sometimes when you have Agile teams, you end up not designing, not having any kind of architecture. So you've got the two extremes. That's the thing here is, on one end, you've got the people that are super, super agile and they don't want to do any requirements or plan anything up front. On the other hand, you've got people that are so much, plan every single thing. And then you've got kind of what's usually right is probably more towards the agile side. As much towards the agile side as you can go, that's what you want to do, because that's going to give you the most flexibility. That's going to give you the better product in the end based on user feedback. But you can't always do that. Again, if you're building something that's going to go to Mars, right, you better plan a lot of that up front. You don't have iteration. You don't have the chance to improve upon it. Same thing if you're building, software that's going to go in an airplane. You might be a little agile, but you're going to plan a lot of that stuff up front, or a spaceship or medical equipment, right? That stuff is going to be more so planned up front. Whereas something that has low consequence for error, that you can get feedback quickly, that's going to be more on the agile side. So that's how you determine it. It's not just a black and white answer. It's not just a simple thing where you just say, well, we should just always be agile. There's a scale there, and you got to respect the context. Anything you do, this is something, just as a quick side note here, is be pragmatic, right? You can't just hold to these hard and fast rules. You can have principles that you don't violate, principles on how you do things and how you operate, but you got to be pragmatic when it comes to process and technique and even tools and technology, right? What is going to be the best tool? What is going to be the best process? What is going to be the best team even, or the best approach to get the job done? And that's all going to depend on what the job is and all the environment, the context, the constraints that you have, and things like that. So anyway, I hope I've answered your question. I wanted to give a really detailed answer because this is a question that comes up a lot, and I hear both of the extremes, and I can nod my head and agree. Yeah, oh yeah, agile. Oh, sometimes agile fails. Sometimes we got to plan up front, and I totally agree. But I don't hear a lot of people saying that it depends on context, and that's really the truth of the situation. You just can't give an absolute in a lot of cases here. So anyway, thanks again for the question. If you have a question for me, email me at john@simpleprogrammer.com. I would love to answer your question. And if you like this channel, subscribe. I'll talk to you next time. Take care.